myself.
Yeah,
When will I spend all of my time in?
it's to make computing more natural. But I think you will you will spend most of your computing time in this when it does the things that you use computing for somewhat better. So maybe having your perfect workstation is a 5% improvement on your coding productivity. Maybe it's not like a completely new thing. Um, but I mean, look, if I could increase the productivity of every engineer in Meta by 5%, um, we'd buy those devices for everyone, and I imagine a lot of other companies would too, and that's how you start getting to the scale that I think makes this rival some of the bigger computing platforms that exist today.
Let me ask you about identity. We talked about the avatar. How do you see identity in the metaverse? Should the avatar be tied to your identity, or can I be anything in the metaverse? Like, can I do whatever the heck I want? Can I even be a troll? So there's exciting, freeing possibilities, and there's the darker possibilities too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a range, right? So we're working on, for expression and avatars, um, on one end of the spectrum are kind of expressive and cartoonish avatars, and then on the other end of the spectrum are photorealistic avatars. And I just think the reality is that there are going to be different use cases for different things. And I guess there's another axis. So if you're going from photorealistic to expressive, there's also like representing you directly versus like some fantasy identity. And I think that there are going to be things on all ends of that spectrum too, right? So you'll want photo, like in some experience you might want to be like a photorealistic dragon, right? Or if I'm playing Onward, which is this military simulator game, it's I think getting to be more photorealistic as a soldier in that could enhance the experience. There are times when I'm hanging out with friends where I want them to know it's me, so kind of cartoonish or expressive version of me is good. But there are also experiences like VR chat does this well today, where a lot of the experience is kind of dressing up and wearing a fantastical avatar that's almost like a meme or is humorous. So you come into an experience and it's almost like you have like a built-in icebreaker, because like you see people and you're just like, all right, I'm cracking up at what you're wearing because that's funny, and it's just like, where'd you get that? Or oh, you made that? That's it's awesome. Whereas, okay, if you're going into a work meeting, maybe a photorealistic version of your real self is going to be the most appropriate thing for that. So I think the reality is there aren't going to be it's not just going to be one thing. My own sense of kind of how you want to express identity online has sort of evolved over time, in that early days in Facebook, I thought, okay, people were going to have one identity. Now I think that's clearly not going to be the case. I think you're going to have all these different things, and there's utility in being able to do different things. So some of the technical challenges that I'm really interested in around it are, how do you build the software to allow people to seamlessly go between them? So say you could view them as just completely discrete points on a spectrum, but let's talk about the metaverse economy for a second. Let's say I buy a digital shirt for my photorealistic avatar, which, by the way, I think at the time where we're spending a lot of time in the metaverse doing a lot of our work meetings in the metaverse, etc., I would imagine that the economy around virtual clothing, as an example, is going to be quite as big. Why wouldn't I spend almost as much money in investing in my appearance or expression for my photorealistic avatar for meetings as I would for whatever I'm going to wear in my video chat? But the question is, okay, so
no one wants to talk to you.
Avatar. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to basically translate that into a more expressive thing for your kind of cartoonish or expressive avatar? And there are multiple ways to do that. You can view them as two discrete points, and okay, maybe if a designer sells one thing, then it actually comes in a pack and there's two, and you can use either one on that. But I actually think this stuff might exist more as a spectrum in the future, and that's what I do think the direction on some of the AI advances that is happening, to be able to, especially stuff around like style transfer, being able to take a piece of art or express something and say, okay, paint me this photo in the style of Gauguin, or whoever it is that you're interested in. take this shirt and put it in the style of what I've designed for my expressive avatar, I think that's going to be pretty compelling.
And so the fashion, you might be buying like a generator, like a closet that generates a style, and then like with the gowns, you'll be able to infinitely generate outfits, thereby making it. So the reason I wear the same thing all the time is I don't like choice. You've talked about the same thing, but now you don't even have to choose. Your closet generates your outfit for you every time, so you have to live with the outfit it generates.
You could do that, although I think I think some people will, but I think that there's going to be a huge aspect of just people doing creative commerce here. So I think that there is going to be a big market around people designing digital clothing. But the question is, if you're designing digital clothing, do you need to design? If you're the designer, do you need to make it for each kind of specific, discrete point along a spectrum? Or are you just designing it for kind of a photorealistic case or an expressive case, or can you design one and have it translate across these things? If I buy a style from a designer who I care about, and now I'm a dragon, is there a way to morph that so it goes on the dragon in a way that makes sense? And that I think is an interesting AI problem, because you're probably not going to make it so that that designers have to go design for all those things. But the more useful the digital content is that you buy in a lot of uses, in a lot of use cases, the more that economy will just explode. And that's a lot of what all of the we were joking about NFTs before, but I think a lot of the promise here is that if the digital goods that you buy are not just tied to one platform or one use case, they end up being more valuable, which means that people are more willing and more likely to invest in them, and that just spurs the whole economy.
But the question is, that's a fascinating positive aspect, but the potential negative aspect is that you can have people concealing their identity, control, or even not people bots. So how do you know in the metaverse that you're talking to a real human or an AI or a well-intentioned human? Is that something you think about, something you're concerned about?
Well, let's break that down into a few different cases. Because knowing that you're talking to someone who has good intentions is something that I think is not even solved in pretty much anywhere. But if you're talking to someone who's a dragon, I think it's pretty clear that they're not representing themselves as a person. I think probably the most pernicious thing that you want to solve for is, I think probably one of the scariest ones is, how do you make sure that someone isn't impersonating you? Right, so you're in a future version of this conversation, and we have photorealistic avatars, and we're doing this in workrooms or whatever the future version of that is, and someone walks in who looks like me. How do you know that that's me? And one of the things that we're thinking about is, it's still a pretty big AI project to be able to generate photorealistic avatars.
Dude, he's still talking about this shit?
They work like these codecs of you, right? So you kind of have a map from your headset, whatever sensors, what your body's actually doing, and it takes the model and it kind of displays it in VR.
But
there's a question, which is, should there be some sort of biometric security,
so
that when I put on my VR headset, or I'm going to go use that avatar, I need to first prove that I am that. And I think you probably are going to want something like that. So that's, as we're developing these technologies, we're also thinking about the security for things like that, because people aren't going to want to be impersonated. That's a huge security issue. Then you just get the question of people hiding behind fake accounts to do malicious things, which is not going to be unique to the metaverse, although certainly in a environment where it's more immersive, you have more of a sense of presence, it could be more painful. But this is obviously something that we've just dealt with for years in social media and the internet more broadly. And there, I think, there have been a bunch of tactics that I think we've just evolved to, we've built up these different AI systems to basically get a sense of, is this account behaving in the way that a person would? And it turns out, so in all of the work that we've done around, we call it community integrity, and it's basically like policing harmful content and trying to figure out where to draw the line. There are all these really hard philosophical questions around where do you draw the line on some of this stuff. And the thing that I've kind of found the most effective is, as much as possible, trying to figure out who are the inauthentic accounts, or where are the accounts that are behaving in an overall harmful way at the account level, rather than trying to get into like policing what they're saying, right? Which I think in the metaverse is going to be even harder, because that the metaverse, I think, will have more properties of, it's almost more like a phone call, right? Or like, or it's not like I post a piece of content and is that piece of content good or bad? So I think more of this stuff will have to be done at the level of the account. But this is the area where, between the kind of counterintelligence teams that we built up inside the company, and like years of building just different AI systems to basically detect what is a real account and what isn't. I'm not saying we're perfect, but like this is an area where I just think we are like years ahead of basically anyone else in the industry in terms of having built those capabilities, and I think that just is going to be incredibly important for this next wave of things.
And like you said, on a technical level, on a philosophical level, it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. By the way, I would probably like to open source my avatar so there could be like millions of Lexes walking around, just like an army.
Like Agent Smith.
Agent Smith, yeah, exactly. So the Unity ML folks built a copy of me and they sent it to me. So there's a person running around, and I've just been doing reinforcement learning on it. I was gonna release it because just to have sort of like thousands of Lexes doing reinforcement learning, so they fall over naturally. They have to learn how to like walk around and stuff. So I love that idea, this tension between biometric security. You want to have one identity, but then certain avatars you might have to have many. I don't know which is better security, sort of flooding the world with Lexes and thereby achieving security, or really being protected with your identity. I have to ask you a security question, actually.
Well, how does flooding the world with Lexes help me know in our conversation that I'm talking to the real Lex?
I completely destroy the trust in all my relationships then, right? If I flood, because then it's,
I think that one's not going to work that well for you.
It's not going to work that
I mean,
for the original copy.
It really fits some things. Like if you're a public figure, you're trying to have, a bunch of, if you're trying to show up in a bunch of different places in the future, you'll be able to do that in the metaverse. So that kind of replication, I think, will be useful. But I do think you're going to want a notion of like, I am talking to the real one.
Yeah, especially if the fake ones start outperforming you in all your private relationships, and then you're left behind. I mean, that's a serious concern having the clones. Again, the things I think about. Okay, so I recently got I use QNAP NAS storage, so just storage for video stuff, and I recently got hacked. This is the first time for me. It was with ransomware. It's not me personally. It's all QNAP devices. So the question that people have about security in general, because I was doing a lot of the right things in terms of security, and nevertheless, ransomware basically disabled my device.
Yeah.
Is that something you think about? What are the different steps you can take to protect people's data on the security front?
I think that there's different solutions for in strategies where it makes sense to have stuff kind of put behind a fortress, right? So the centralized model versus decentralizing. And I think both have strengths and weaknesses. So I think anyone who says, okay, just decentralize everything, that'll make it more secure, I think that that's tough because, the advantage of something like, encryption is that, we run the largest encrypted service in the world with WhatsApp. And we're one of the first to roll out a multi-platform encryption service, and that's something that I think was a big advance for the industry. And one of the promises that we can basically make because of that, our company doesn't see when you're sending an encrypted message, and an encrypted message what the content is and what you're sharing. So that way, if someone hacks Meta's servers, they're not going to be able to access the WhatsApp message that you're sending to your friend. And that, I think, matters a lot to people because obviously if someone is able to compromise a company's servers and that company has hundreds of millions or billions of people, then that ends up being a very big deal. The flip side of that is, okay, all the content is on your phone. Are you following security best practices on your phone? If you lose your phone, all your content is gone. So that's an issue. Maybe you go back up your content from WhatsApp or some other service in iCloud or something, but then you're just at Apple's whims about are they going to go turn over the data to some government or are they going to get hacked? And so a lot of the time it is useful to have data in a centralized place too, because then you can train systems that can just do much better personalization. I think that in a lot of cases, centralized systems can offer, especially if you're a serious company, you're running the state of the art stuff, and you have red teams attacking your own stuff, and you're putting out bounty programs and trying to attract some of the best hackers in the world to go break into your stuff all the time. So any system is going to have security issues, but I think the best way forward is to basically try to be as aggressive and open about hardening the systems as possible, not trying to kind of hide and pretend that there aren't going to be issues, which I think is over time why a lot of open source systems have gotten relatively more secure, is because they're open. It's not, rather than pretending that there aren't going to be issues, just people surface them quicker. So I think you want to adopt that approach as a company and just constantly be hardening yourself.
Trying to stay one step ahead of the attackers.
It's an inherently adversarial space.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting, security is interesting because of the different kind of threats that we've managed over the last 5 years. There are ones where basically the adversaries keep on getting better and better. So trying to kind of interfere with security is certainly one area of this. If you have like nation states that are trying to interfere in elections or something, like they're kind of evolving their tactics. Whereas on the other hand, I don't want to be too simplistic about it, but like if someone is saying something hateful, people usually aren't getting smarter and smarter about how they say hateful things, right? So maybe there's some element of that, but it's a very small dynamic compared to how advanced attackers and some of these other places get over time.
I believe most people are good, so they actually get better over time and not being less hateful, because they realize it's not fun being hateful. That's at least the belief I have. But first, bathroom break.
Sure.
Okay. So we'll come back to AI, but let me ask you some difficult questions now. Social Dilemma is a popular documentary that raised concerns about the effects of social media on society. You responded with a point-by-point rebuttal titled, "What the Social Dilemma Gets Wrong." People should read that. I would say the key point they make is because social media is funded by ads, algorithms want to maximize attention and engagement, and an effective way to do so is get people angry at each other, increase division, and so on. Can you steel man their criticisms and arguments that they make in the documentary as a way to understand the concern and as a way to respond to it?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have. I don't happen to agree with the conclusions, and I think that they make a few assumptions that are just very big jumps that I don't think are reasonable to make. But I understand overall why people would be concerned that our business model and ads in general, we do make more money as people use the service more in general, right? So as a kind of basic assumption, okay, do we have an incentive for people to build a service that people use more? Yes, on a lot of levels. I mean, we think what we're doing is good. So we think that if people are finding it useful, they'll use it more. Or if you just look at it as this sort of, if the only thing we cared about is money, which is not for anyone who knows me, but okay, we're a company, so let's say you just kind of simplified it down to that. Then would we want people to use the services more? Yes. But then you get to the second question, which is, does kind of getting people agitated make them more likely to use the services more? And I think from looking at other media in the world, especially TV, and there's the old news adage, if it bleeds, it leads. Like I think that there are a bunch of reasons why someone might think that that kind of provocative content would be the most engaging. Now, what I've always found is two things. One is that what grabs someone's attention in the near term is not necessarily something that they're going to appreciate having seen, or going to be the best over the long term. So I think what a lot of people get wrong is that I'm not building this company to like make the most money or get people to spend the most time on this in the next quarter or the next year, right? I've been doing this for 17 years at this point, and I'm still relatively young and have a lot more that I want to do over the coming decades. So, like, I I think that it's too simplistic to say, hey, this might increase time in the near term, therefore it's what you're going to do. Because I actually think a deeper look at kind of what my incentives are, the incentives of a company that are focused on the long term, is to basically do what people are going to find valuable over time, not what is going to draw people's attention today. The other thing that I'd say is that I think a lot of times people look at this from the perspective of media, um, or kind of information or civic discourse. But one other way of looking at this is just that, okay, I'm a product designer, right? Our company, we build products, and a big part of building a product is not just the function and utility of what you're delivering, but the feeling of how it feels, right? We spend a lot of time talking about virtual reality and how the kind of key aspect of that experience is the feeling of presence, which is it's a visceral thing. It's not just about the utility that you're delivering; it's about like the sensation. And similarly, I care a lot about how people feel when they use our products, and I don't want to build products that make people angry. I mean, that's like not, I think, what we're here on this earth to do is to, build something that, people spend a bunch of time doing and it just kind of makes them angrier at other people. I mean, and that's not good. That's not what I think would be, um, sort of a good use of our time or a good contribution to the world. So, okay, and people, they tell us on a per content basis, does this thing, do I like it? Do I love it? Does it make me angry? Does it make me sad? And, based on that, I mean, we choose to basically show content that makes people angry less. Because, of course, right, you're designing a product and you want people to be able to connect and feel good over a long period of time, then that's, naturally what you're going to do. So, I don't know. I think overall, I understand at a high level, if you're not thinking too deeply about it, why that argument might be appealing. But I just think if you actually look at what our real incentives are, not just like, if we were trying to optimize for the next week, but like as people working on this, like why are we here? And I think it's pretty clear that that's not actually how you would want to design the system. I guess one other thing that I'd say is that, while we're focused on the ads business model, I do think it's important to note that a lot of these issues are not unique to ads. I mean, so take like a subscription news business model, for example. I think that has just as many potential pitfalls. Maybe if someone's paying for a subscription, you don't get paid per piece of content that they look at. But say for example, I think like a bunch of the partisanship that we see could potentially be made worse by you have these kind of partisan um, news organizations that basically sell subscriptions, and they're only going to get people on one side to basically subscribe to them. So their incentive is not to print content or produce content that's kind of centrist or down the line either. I bet that what a lot of them find is that if they produce stuff that's kind of more polarizing or more partisan, then that is what gets them more subscribers. So I think that this stuff is all, there's no perfect business model. Everything has pitfalls. The thing that I think is great about advertising is it makes the consumer services free, which if you believe that everyone should have a voice and everyone should be able to connect, then that's a great thing, as opposed to building a luxury service that not everyone can afford. But look, I mean, every business model, you have to be careful about how you're implementing what you're doing.
You responded to a few things there. You spoke to the fact that, there is a narrative of malevolence, like, you're leaning into the making people angry just because it makes more money in the short term, that kind of thing. So you responded to that. But there's also a kind of reality of human nature, just like you spoke about. There's fights, arguments we get in, and we don't like ourselves afterwards, but we got into them anyway. So our long-term growth is, I believe for most of us, has to do with learning, challenging yourself, improving, being kind to each other, finding a community of people that you connect with on a real human level, all that kind of stuff. But it does seem, when you look at social media, that a lot of fights break out, a lot of arguments break out, a lot of viral content ends up being sort of outrage in one direction or the other. And so it's easy from that to infer the narrative that social media companies are letting this outrage become viral. And so they're increasing this division in the world. And perhaps you can comment on that, or further, how can you push back on this narrative? How can you be transparent about this battle? Because I think it's not just motivation or financials. It's a technical problem too, which is how do you improve long-term well-being of human beings?
I think that going through some of the design decisions would be a good conversation. But first, I actually think, I think you acknowledge that, that narrative is somewhat anecdotal, and I think it's worth grounding this conversation in the actual research that has been done on this, which, by and large, finds that social media is not a large driver of polarization. And, there's been a number of economists and social scientists and folks who have studied this. A lot of polarization, it varies around the world. Social media is basically in every country. Facebook's in pretty much every country except for China and maybe North Korea. And you see different trends in different places where, in a lot of countries, polarization is declining. In some, it's flat. In the U.S., it's risen sharply. So the question is, what are the unique phenomena in the different places? And I think for the people who are trying to say, hey, social media is the thing that's doing this, I think that clearly doesn't hold up, because social media is a phenomenon that is pretty much equivalent in all of these different countries. And you have researchers like this economist at Stanford, Matthew Genskow, who's just written at length about this. It's a bunch of books by political scientists, like Ezra Klein and folk, which wrote Why We're Polarized, basically goes through this decades-long analysis in the U.S. Before I was born, basically talking about some of the forces in kind of partisan politics and Fox News and different things that predate the internet in a lot of ways that I think are likely larger contributors. So to the contrary on this, not only is it pretty clear that social media is not a major contributor, but most of the academic studies that I've seen actually show that social media use is correlated with lower polarization. Genskow, the same person who just did the study that I cited about longitudinal polarization across different countries, also did a study that basically showed that if you looked after the 2016 election in the U.S., the voters who were the most polarized were actually the ones who were not on the internet. So, and there have been recent other studies, I think in Europe and around the world, basically showing that as people stop using social media, they tend to get more polarized. Then there's a deeper analysis around, okay, well, what polarization actually isn't even one thing. Because, having different opinions on something isn't, I don't think that that's by itself bad. What people who study this say is most problematic is what they call affective polarization, which is basically, do you have negative feelings towards people of another group? And the way that a lot of scholars study this is they basically ask a group, would you let your kids marry someone of group X? Whatever the groups are that you're worried that someone might have negative feelings towards. And in general, use of social media has corresponded to decreases in that kind of affective polarization. So I just want to, I think we should talk through the design decisions and how we handle the kind of specific pieces of content, but overall, I think it's just worth grounding that discussion in the research that's existed that I think overwhelmingly shows that the mainstream narrative around this is just not right.
But the narrative does stay cold, and it's compelling to a lot of people. There's another question I'd like to ask you on this. I was looking at various polls and saw that you're one of the most disliked tech leaders today. 54% unfavorable rating. Elon Musk is 23%. It's basically everybody has a very high unfavorable rating that are tech leaders. Maybe you can help me understand that. Why do you think so many people dislike you? Some even hate you. And how do you regain their trust and support? Given everything you just said, why are you losing the battle in explaining to people what actual impact social media has on society?
Well, I'm curious if that's a U.S. survey or world.
It is U.S. Yeah.
So I think that there's a few dynamics. One is that
Easily.
our brand
Was there proof everywhere?
has been somewhat uniquely challenged in the U.S. compared to other places. It's not that there are. I mean, other countries we have issues too, but I think in the U.S. there was this dynamic where if you look at like the sentiment of kind of coverage or attitude towards us, before 2016, I think there were probably very few months, if any, where it was negative, and since 2016, I think there have probably been very few months, if any, that it's been positive in politics. So I think it's a specific thing, and this is very different from other places. I think in a lot of other countries in the world, the sentiment towards Meta and our services is extremely positive. In the U.S., we have more challenges, and I think compared to other companies, you can look at certain industries. I think if you look at it from like a partisan perspective, not from like a political perspective, but just kind of culturally, it's like there are people who are probably more left of center, and there are people who are more right of center, and there's kind of blue America and red America. There are certain industries that I think maybe one half of the country has a more positive view towards than another. And I think we're in one of the positions that we're in that I think is really challenging is that because of a lot of the content decisions that we've basically had to arbitrate, and because we're not a partisan company, right? We're not a Democrat company or a Republican company. We're trying to make the best decisions we can to help people connect and help people have as much voice as they can while having some rules because we're running a community. The net effect of that is that we're kind of constantly making decisions that piss off people in both camps. And the effect that I've sort of seen is that when we make a decision that's a controversial one, that's going to upset, say, about half the country,
Zuckerberg, you
those
suck.
decisions are all negative sum from a brand perspective. Because it's not like if we make that decision decision in one way, and say half the country is happy about that
Who
particular
the
decision
fuck?
that we make, they tend to not say, "Oh,
Who
sweet,
the
glad I
fuck
got
is
that one right."
Rabbi
They're
Lama
just like,
Ben
"Oh, you didn't mess that one up," right? But their opinion doesn't tend to go up by that much. Whereas the people who kind of are on the other side of it, are like, "God, how could you mess that up? Like, how could you possibly think that like that piece of content is okay and should be up and should not be censored?" Or, and so I think whereas if you leave it up and um, it's or if you take it down, the people thought it should be taken down, or it's like, all right, fine, great, you didn't mess that one up. So our internal assessment of the kind of analytics on our brand are basically any time one of these big controversial things comes up in society, our brand goes down with half of the country. And then if you just kind of extrapolate that out, it's just been very challenging for us to try to navigate what is a polarizing country in a principled way. But we're not trying to kind of hew to one side or the other. We're trying to do what we think is the right thing. But that's what I think is the right thing for us to do, though. So, I mean, that's what we'll try to keep doing.
Just as a human being, how does it feel, though, when you're giving so much of your day-to-day life to try to heal division, to try to do good in the world, as we've talked about, that so many people in the U.S., the place you call home, have a negative view of you as a leader, as a human being, and the company you love?
Well, I mean, it's not great, but I mean, look, if I wanted people to think positively about me as a person, I don't know. I'm not sure if you go build a company. I mean, it's like
or a social media company.
I mean, it's
exceptionally difficult to
Zuckerberg,
do.
you suck.
So
everyone thinks you are a terrible person, and no one likes you.
Where a lot of the other people running these companies, internet companies,
everyone hates
have sort of stepped back.
What
and
is this
they just do
garbage?
things that are sort of
holy shit, Rabbi Lama
less
Ben is
controversial.
still alive.
And
he's some other person
some of
wants
it may
to
be that they just get tired over time. But
with you, technically.
So I don't know. I think that running a company is hard. Building something at scale is hard. You only really do it for a long period of time if you really care about what you're doing. And yeah, so I mean, it's not great, but look, I think that at some level,
I like how I'm the first
25% of people dislike you, or 75% of people dislike you. Your experience as a public figure is going to be that there's a lot of people who dislike you. Right? So, so I actually am not sure how different it is. Certainly, the country's gotten more polarized, and
Zuckerberg, you are the worst.
More
of all the people on Earth ever, you are the worst of them.
But I don't know. I kind of think as a public figure and
you're a loser douche. There's no one on this fucking stream I have bashed more and harder than you, Mark Douche Canoe Zuckerberg. You suck. I don't like you. I think you're a loser.
What you need to do is be able to figure out,
and you're a
who
bitch.
are the kind of good faith critics
douche.
who are criticizing you because
Dr.
they're trying to help you do a better job rather than tear you down. And those are the people who I just think you have to cherish and and listen very closely to the things that they're saying, because I think it's just as dangerous to tune out everyone who says anything negative and just listen to the people who are kind of positive and support you, as it would be psychologically to pay attention trying to make people who are never going to like you. So I think that's just kind of a dance that people have to do. But I mean, you kind of develop more of a feel for who actually is trying to accomplish the same types of things in the world, and who has different ideas about how to do that, and how can I learn from those people. And yeah, we get stuff wrong, and when the people whose opinions I respect call me out on getting stuff wrong, that hurts and makes me want to do better. But I think at this point I'm pretty tuned to just, all right, if I know they're kind of operating in bad faith and they're not really trying to help, then I don't know. It doesn't. I think over time it just doesn't bother you that much.
But you are surrounded by people that believe in the mission, that love you. Are there friends or colleagues in your inner circle you trust that call you on in your bullshit whenever your thinking may be misguided as it is for leaders at times?
I think we have a famously open company culture. why there's so much material internally that can leak out with people sort of disagreeing, is because that's sort of the culture. Our management team, I think it's a lot of people. There's some newer folks who come in. There's some folks who've kind of been there for a while, but there's a very high level of trust, and I would say it is a relatively confrontational group of people. And my friends and family, I think, will push me on this, but look, but it's not just, but I think you need some diversity, right? It can't just be, people who are your friends and family. It's also, there are journalists or analysts or, peer executives at other companies or, other people who sort of are insightful about thinking about the world, certain politicians, or people kind of in that sphere who I just think have like very insightful perspectives who, even if they come at the world from a different perspective, which is sort of what makes the perspective so valuable, but, I think fundamentally we're trying to get to the same place in terms of, helping people connect more, helping the whole world function better, not just, one place or another. And I don't know, those are the people whose opinions really matter to me. And that's how I learn on a day-to-day basis. People are constantly sending me comments on stuff. Or
you suck. Did they tell you that? Not enough.
And I don't know. It's kind of constantly evolving, this model of the world and kind of what we should be aspiring to be.
You've talked about, you have a famously open culture, which comes with the criticism and the painful experiences. So let me ask you another difficult question. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, leaked the internal Instagram research into teenagers and well-being. Her claim is that Instagram is choosing profit over well-being of teenage girls, so Instagram is, quote, toxic for them. Your response, titled, "What Our Research Really Says About Teen Well-Being in Instagram," says, no, Instagram research shows that 11 of 12 well-being issues, teenage girls who said they struggle with those difficult issues also said that Instagram made them better rather than worse. Again, can you steel man and defend the point and Frances Haugen's characterization of the study, and then help me understand the positive and negative effects of Instagram and Facebook on young people?
So there are certainly questions around teen mental health that are really important. It's hard to, as a parent, it's like hard to imagine any set of questions that are sort of more important. I guess maybe other aspects of physical health or well-being or probably come to that level. But like, these are really important questions, right? Which is why we dedicate teams to studying them. I don't think the internet or social media are unique in having these questions. I think people, and there have been sort of magazines promoting certain body types for women and kids for decades, but we really care about this stuff. So we wanted to study it, and of course, we didn't expect that everything was going to be positive all the time. So the reason why you study this stuff is to try to improve and get better. So look, the place where I disagree with the characterization, first, I thought, some of the reporting and coverage of it just took the whole thing out of proportion, and that it focused on, as you said, I think there were like 20 metrics in there, and on 18 or 19, the effect of using Instagram was neutral or positive on the teen's well-being, and there was one area where I think it showed that we needed to improve, and we took some steps to try to do that after doing the research. But I think having the coverage just focus on that one without focusing on the, I think an accurate characterization would have been that kids using Instagram, or not kids, teens, is generally positive for their mental health. But of course that was not the narrative that came out. So I think it's hard to, that's not a kind of logical thing to straw man, but I sort of disagree, or steel man, but I sort of disagree with that overall characterization. I think anyone sort of looking at this objectively would. But then, there is this sort of intent critique that I think you were getting at before, which says, it assumes some sort of malevolence, right? It's like, which it's really hard for me to really wrap my head around this, because as far as I know, it's not clear that any of the other tech companies are doing this kind of research. So why the narrative should form that we did research because we're studying an issue because we wanted to understand it to improve, and took steps after that to try to improve it, that your interpretation of that would be that we did the research and tried to sweep it under the rug. It sort of is like, I don't know, it's beyond credibility to me that like that's the accurate description of the actions that we've taken compared to the others in the industry. So I don't know, that's my view on it. These are really important issues, and there's a lot of stuff that I think we're going to be working on related to teen mental health for a long time, including trying to understand this better. And I would encourage everyone else in the industry to do this too.
Yeah, I would love there to be open conversation, a lot of great research being released internally and then also externally. It doesn't make me feel good to see press obviously get way more clicks when they say negative things about social media. Objectively speaking, I can just tell that there's hunger to say negative things about social media. And I don't understand how that's supposed to lead to an open conversation about the positives and the negative concerns about social media, especially when you're doing that kind of research. I mean, I don't know what to do with that, but let me ask you as a father, does it weigh heavy on you that people get bullied on social networks? So people get bullied in their private life. But now, because so much of our life is in the digital world, the bullying moves from the physical world to the digital world. So you're now creating a platform on which bullying happens. And some of that bullying can lead to damage to mental health. And some of that bullying can lead to depression, even suicide. Does it weigh heavy on you that people have committed suicide or will commit suicide based on the bullying that happens on social media?
Yeah, I mean, this is there's a set of harms that we basically track and build systems to fight against, and bullying and self-harm are, I mean, these are some of the biggest things that we are most focused on. For bullying, like you say, it's going to be, while this predates the internet, then it's probably impossible to get rid of all of it. You want to give people tools to fight it, and you want to fight it yourself, and you also want to make sure that people have the tools to get help when they need it. So I think this isn't like a question of, can you get rid of all bullying? I mean, it's like, all right, I mean, I have two daughters, and they fight and push each other around and stuff too. And the question is just how do you handle that situation? And there's a handful of things that I think you can do. We talked a little bit before around some of the AI tools that you can build to identify when something harmful is happening. It's very hard in bullying because a lot of bullying is very context specific. It's not like you're trying to fit a formula of like, if like looking at the different harms, someone promoting a terrorist group is like probably one of the simpler things to generally find, because things promoting that group are going to look a certain way or feel a certain way. Bullying could just be someone making some subtle comment about someone's appearance that's idiosyncratic to them,
and it could look at just like humor. So humor to one person
exactly
can be destructive to another.
Yeah. So with bullying, I think there are certain things that you can find through AI systems, but I think it is increasingly important to just give people more agency themselves. So we've done things like making it so people can turn off comments or take a break from hearing from a specific person without having to signal at all that they're going to stop following them or kind of make some stand that, okay, I'm not friends with you anymore, I'm not following you. I just don't want to hear about this, but I also don't want to signal at all publicly that or to them that there's been an issue. And then you get to some of the more extreme cases like you're talking about, where someone is thinking about self-harm or suicide, and there we found that is a place where AI can identify a lot. as well as people flagging things. If people are expressing something that is potentially they're thinking of hurting themselves, those are cues that you can build systems in hundreds of languages around the world to be able to identify that. And one of the things that I'm actually quite proud of is we've built these systems that I think are clearly leading at this point that not only identify that, but then connect with local first responders and have been able to save, I think, at this point, in thousands of cases, be able to get first responders to people through these systems who really need them. Because of specific plumbing that we've done between the AI work and being able to communicate with local first responder organizations, and we're rolling that out in more places around the world. And I think the team that worked on that just did awesome stuff. So I think that's a long way of saying, yeah, I mean, this is a heavy topic, and you want to attack it in a bunch of different ways, and also kind of understand that some of nature is for people to do this to each other, which is unfortunate, but you can give people tools and build things that help.
It's still one hell of a burden, though. A platform that allows people to fall in love with each other is also by nature going to be a platform that allows people to hurt each other. And when you're managing such a platform, it's difficult. And I think you spoke to it, but the psychology of that, of being a leader in that space, of creating technologies that's playing in this space, and you mentioned psychology, is really damn difficult. And I mean, the burden of that is just great. I just wanted to hear you speak to that point. I have to ask about the thing you brought up a few times, which is making controversial decisions. Let's talk about free speech and censorship. So there are two groups of people pressuring Meta on this. One group is upset that Facebook, the social network, allows misinformation in quotes to be spread on the platform. The other group are concerned that Facebook censors speech by calling it misinformation. So you're getting it from both sides. You, in 2019, October, at Georgetown University, eloquently defended the importance of free speech. But then COVID came, and the 2020 election came. Do you worry that outside pressures from advertisers, politicians, the public have forced Meta to damage the ideal of free speech that you spoke highly of?
Just to say some obvious things up front, I don't think pressure from advertisers or politicians directly in any way affects how we think about this. I think these are just hard topics. So let me just take you through our evolution from kind of the beginning.
Yeah, why don't you take me through your evolution, you fucking cunt?
You don't build a company like this unless you believe that people expressing themselves is a good thing.
I think you're the one of the worst people
the foundational thing.
in the history of mankind.
Think about our company as a formula.
Everyone thinks you suck.
Giving people voice.
Your own parents hate you.
Creates opportunity. Right, so those are the two things that we're always.
Your wife hates you.
Sort of helping people connect.
And you're a douche.
But also giving people voice.
And everybody knows it.
Then,
I know it.
Most of the time when people express themselves, that's not like
you know it.
Politically controversial content. It's like expressing something about their identity that's more related to.
How do I make myself into an avatar? Because all my friends they're like, they think it's funny. No, you're just a billionaire and they have to be nice to you.
Strongly enough about something, it kind of becomes a political topic. That's sort of always been a thing that we've focused on. There's always been the question of safety in this. Which,
not the safety.
If you're building a community, I think you have to focus on safety. We've had these community standards from early on. And there were about 20 different kinds of harm that we track and try to fight actively. We've talked about some of them already.
How about fuck yourself? Is that one of them?
It includes things like bullying and harassment. It includes things like terrorism or promoting terrorism, inciting violence, intellectual property theft. And in general, I think, call it about 18 out of 20 of those, there's not really a particularly polarized definition of that. I think you're not really going to find many people in the country or in the world who are trying to say we should be fighting terrorist content less. I think that the content where there are a couple of areas where I think this has gotten more controversial recently, which I'll talk about. And you're right that misinformation is up there, and I think sometimes the definition of hate speech is up there too. But I think in general, most of the content that I think we're working on for safety is not actually, people don't kind of have these questions. So it's sort of this subset. But if you go back to the beginning of the company, this was sort of pre-deep learning days, and therefore, and it was me and my roommate Dustin joined me, and like if someone posted something bad, it was the AI technology did not exist yet to be able to go basically look at all the content, and we were a small enough outfit that no one would expect that we could review it all, even if like someone reported it to us. We basically did our best, right? It's like someone would report it, we try to look at stuff and deal with stuff. And for called the first, I don't know, 7 or 8 years of the company, we weren't that big of a company. For a lot of that period, we weren't even really profitable. Well, the AI didn't really exist to be able to do the kind of moderation that we do today. And then at some point, in kind of the middle of the last decade, that started to flip. And we it got to the point where we were sort of a larger, more profitable company, and the AI was starting to come online to be able to proactively detect some of the simpler forms of this. So things like pornography, you could train an image classifier to identify what a nipple was, or you could fight against terrorist content. You still
actually papers on this. It's great.
Oh, of course there are.
Technical papers.
Of course there are. Those are relatively easier things to train AI to do than, for example, understand the nuances of what is inciting violence in 100 languages around the world, and not have the false positives of like, okay, are you posting about this thing that might be inciting violence because you're actually trying to denounce it? In which case, we probably shouldn't take that down. Or if you're trying to denounce something that's inciting violence in some kind of dialect in a corner of India, as opposed to, okay, actually you're posting this thing because you're trying to incite violence. Okay, building an AI that can basically get to that level of nuance in all the languages that we serve is something that I think is only really becoming possible now, not towards the middle of the last decade. But there's been this evolution, and I think what happened, people sort of woke up after 2016, and a lot of people think, okay, the country is a lot more polarized, and there's a lot more stuff here than we realized. Why weren't, and I think at that point, or that you're not getting to, and you need to get more effective at that, and I was pretty sad. But then I think at some point, a broad understanding of human rights and the trade-offs around free expression, so
you're done,
people who are going to lean towards free expression.
Towards freedom of speech. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's also this idea of fact checkers, so jumping around to the misinformation questions, especially during COVID, which is an exceptionally, speaking of polarization.
Johnson, can I speak to the COVID thing? And I think one of the hardest set of questions around free expression, because you asked about Georgetown, is my stance fundamentally changed.
On the issue, I just have, I'm friends with Joe Rogan, and he's called as a, I remember hanging with me just convincing how well you can do. Like that, to me, that's definitely something that would wake people up to how difficult this problem is if there's more transparency, saying how difficult this problem is. Let me ask you about on the AI front, just because you mentioned
and people and all these other places are interested in it. So being able to translate that just unlocks a lot of value on a day-to-day basis. So the kind of AI around translation is interesting because it's gone through a bunch of iterations. But the basic state of the art is that different kind you use that you built up around other examples, and this some of the advances in self-supervised learning, which I know you talked to Jan about, and he's like one of the leading thinkers in this area. That stuff is really exciting, but then you couple that with the ability to just throw larger and larger amounts of compute at training these models, and you can just do a lot of things that were harder. The advances in AI are so fundamentally interlinked that your wedding anniversary with my wife that's coming up, it's like I think people, you have things that you're looking forward to, or for the girls, it's often I want to see mom in the morning, right? It's like I think that's a really critical thing. And then the last thing is I ask them every day, what did you do today to help someone? Heuristic on
so that like he sucks.
be a world where more people have